What if the movies you thought you knew from the 1950s only scratched the surface? What if, hidden beneath the jukebox jingles and drive-in double bills, there were films so fearless they felt like dispatches from the 21st century? Tonight, we're firing up the projector for 17 forgotten masterpieces that dared to predict our present before most audiences even owned a television. Keep your popcorn close and your mind open. These pictures are about to rewrite everything you assumed about the square decade. Bigger Than Life, 1956. Nicholas Ray weaponized widescreen color to expose the rot behind America's perfect ranch house facade. Shot in CinemaScope on a modest $1.3 million budget, the film traps us in saturated suburban rooms that feel like pressure cookers. James Mason, who also co-produced, plays Ed Avery, a mild-mannered teacher prescribed cortisone for an inflammation that quickly inflates his ego and paranoia. Ray overexposed the negative and printed it slightly dark, making reds throb like warning lights and shadows carved into Mason's face. The effect still feels avant-garde. Studio executives squirmed at a plot suggesting the American dream could be a pharmaceutical hallucination, so Fox buried the release in second-run theaters. Yet, its DNA is everywhere. Martin Scorsese screened it before shooting Taxi Driver. Matthew Weiner mined its simmering domestic tension for Mad Men, and medical ethicists still cite it when discussing Miracle Drug Mania. Watch the scene where Ed berates his son over arithmetic mistakes. The frame widens like a cage, making the living room feel both grand and suffocating. 60-plus years on, the film's critique of consumer pill salvation and masculine fragility hits harder than ever, proving that suburbia's veneer was never as immaculate as a 1950s magazine cover. The Night of the Hunter, 1955. Charles Laughton's lone directorial credit marries Southern Gothic terror with children's book lyricism. Working with cinematographer Stanley Cortez, Laughton spent months storyboarding distorted farmhouse interiors and moonlit river journeys that borrow more from German expressionism than Hollywood thriller grammar. Robert Mitchum's Reverend Harry Powell, love and hate tattooed on his knuckles, stalks two orphans like a Bible-quoting wolf in a fairy tale. United Artists invested barely $800,000, but meticulous lighting and reshoots ran costs higher, alarming executives. Released in August 1955, the film puzzled critics and evaporated from theaters in 2 weeks, ending Laughton's directing career. Yet, every stylistic risk became canonical. Mitchum's sing-song menace echoes through Cape Fear and Blue Velvet, while the child-level riverboat camera anticipates Spielberg's sentimental view of danger and Guillermo del Toro's dark fables. Modern restorations reveal details missed on faded prints, like the painted backdrop night sky that looks almost digital in its stylization. Today, the Library of Congress lists it among the essential American films, and cinematographers study its chiaroscuro to learn how shadow can feel alive. Laughton's box office disaster ultimately bridged silent-era expressionism and modern psychological horror, whispering to future filmmakers that dreams and nightmares occupied the same cinematic riverbank. Ace in the Hole, 1951. Before 24-hour news vans existed, Billy Wilder imagined them. Inspired by the 1925 Floyd Collins cave disaster, he placed a cynical reporter, Kirk Douglas in full reptilian charisma, beside a New Mexico cliffside where a trapped miner becomes a media carnival. Paramount gave Wilder $1.8 million, a hefty sum for a bleak morality tale, and built a real desert pit so cameras could prowl the chaos. Wilder shot only 3 days on sound stages. The rest unfolded under scorching sun to capture dust, sweat, and opportunism in real time. Preview audiences recoiled from the mirror held to their fascination with tragedy, prompting the studio to rename it The Big Carnival, a title just as cynical. Domestic returns barely cleared 1 million, but European critics hailed its honesty, and François Truffaut later cited it as one of the 5 films that pushed him toward directing. Today the plot feels prophetic. Inflatable bounce houses, concession stands, and handheld cameras have literally surrounded modern rescue sites, turning human suffering into content. Watching Douglas deliver his "bad news sells" monologue now feels like eavesdropping on a cable news editorial meeting. Wilder's box office bomb foretold the era when empathy could be monetized one sensational headline at a time. On Dangerous Ground, 1951. Nicholas Ray's second entry on our list begins in urban noir shadows and ends in blinding alpine snow, mirroring its protagonist's journey from brutality to compassion. Robert Ryan plays Jim Wilson, a city detective so violent his superiors exile him to rural Colorado, where he meets Ida Lupino's gentle, blind farm woman. Ray shot Wilson's city sequences with a handheld Arriflex to emphasize jittery aggression, then switched to deep-focus Mitchell cameras for the mountain exteriors, letting the vast white landscape dwarf the characters and cool the film's temperature. Bernard Herrmann's score introduced the electronic viola d'amore, an eerie timbre that would haunt countless later thrillers. RKO marketed it as a double-feature B-picture. Critics praised the performances but missed its genre-splicing audacity. In hindsight, the movie proves film noir can survive outdoors. Kurosawa's High and Low, and Clint Eastwood's tightrope owe debts to its moral thaw. The most striking image is Ryan trudging through knee-deep snow, his black coat a blot on a blank canvas, chasing a killer yet finding his own redemption. The contrast between city claustrophobia and mountain openness remains a masterclass in visual storytelling, reminding viewers that sometimes light, not darkness, reveals the deepest shadows in a man's soul. The Man in the White Suit, 1951. Alec Guinness dons an indestructible, dirt-repelling fabric that threatens to upend both capitalist mill owners and trade union laborers. A comedy premise that foretells every Silicon Valley disruption debate. Director Alexander McKendrick insisted on a real luminescent cloth, so Ealing Studios spent a third of its £258,000 budget-weaving material infused with glass microbeads, a technique later adopted for reflective highway signs. The result photographs with an uncanny glow, making Guinness appear half angel, half lab rat. The screenplay skewers not only greedy executives but also workers fearful of job losses, predicting today's tug-of-war over automation. Upon release, the film won an Oscar nomination for screenplay and became the first British comedy screened behind the Iron Curtain, where factory audiences applauded its critique of runaway innovation. Modern ethicists still reference Sidney Stratton as a parable. Technology that benefits consumers can simultaneously threaten livelihoods unless society adapts. Dialogue crackles with wit. Guinness, eyes wide behind safety goggles, exclaiming, "There's no limit to what man can do," before panic sets in. By the finale, both labor and capital unite to chase him through cobblestone streets, a reminder that progress often spurs unlikely alliances. The luminous suit shines on, an eternal spotlight on humanity's ambivalence toward change. Ugettu, 1953. Kenji Mizoguchi's ghostly wartime parable floats like a silk lantern through fog, blending realist hardship with supernatural longing. Filmed around Lake Biwa near Kyoto, Mizoguchi placed his camera on concealed barges to achieve eerily smooth tracking shots that Martin Scorsese later studied frame by frame. The budget, about 90 million yen, nearly bankrupting Daiei Studios, went toward elaborate period sets and fluid crane rigs. Yet on screen, the production feels weightless. Peasants ferrying pots down misty rivers, spectral ladies gliding through moonlit corridors. Western distributors sliced 12 minutes. Fearing audiences couldn't absorb its Buddhist fatalism, the full cut didn't reach the United States until 1972, when Pauline Coyle declared it modern feminism in a kimono. The plot follows armor-smith Genjuro, whose ambition lures him from his wife into an affair with a ghost princess, mirroring soldiers lured by wartime glory only to encounter ruin. Mizoguchi's long takes, some over 3 minutes, let tragedy creep in like tidewater, and his female characters possess agency rare even in contemporary cinema. The Silver Lion at Venice affirmed its artistry, but its deepest legacy lies in how directors portray war's collateral damage on families, echoed by Coppola's Apocalypse Now, River Journey, and Kurosawa's Throne of Blood spectral forests. Ugetsu remains a cautionary murmur. Ambition can be as transient as morning mist. La Pointe Courte, 1955. Agnes Varda, armed with a €10,000 inheritance and a borrowed Camaflex camera, wandered into the fishing quarter of Sète to craft a movie that would quietly invent the French New Wave. She spliced two threads, a crumbling Parisian marriage walking among nets and boats, and semi-documentary scenes of villagers battling bureaucrats over polluted waters. Because she shot on ends of 35mm stock donated by theater friends, every meter counted. Takes are deliberate but alive, capturing gulls screeching and children diving for clams. Lighting came from the Mediterranean sun, forcing the negative to be pushed to ASA 400. Grainy textures later adopted by Godard and Truffaut. Parisian exhibitors shrugged, yet private loft screenings attracted the Nalzan Cahiers du Cinéma crowd, who saw Varda's camera write rather than merely record. Jean-Luc Godard famously declared it the first film truly filmed with eyes open. Beyond its formal daring, La Pointe Courte humanizes socio-economic struggle. Fishermen risk poisoning their catch. Lovers risk poisoning their bond. Today, film schools teach it beside Italian neorealism as a missing chromosome in cinema's evolution. Proof one woman with a camera and empathy can overturn a century of rigid studio grammar. Every handheld roam through city streets owes a debt to Varda's salty breeze. The Steel Helmet, 1951. Samuel Fuller, a cigar-chomping World War II veteran, wrote and directed the first feature about the Korean War while the conflict still raged. Shot in 10 days on a reported $104,000 budget, some say less. He repurposed a Los Angeles park as war-torn Korea, scattering smoke pots and bullet-pocked mannequins. The plot follows a scarred sergeant, a black medic, and a Japanese-American soldier holed up in a Buddhist temple, battling both communist snipers and internal prejudices. U.S. Army officials balked at scenes of a racist sergeant and the cold-blooded execution of a POW, but Fuller, brandishing his infantry record, refused cuts. Against expectations, the film cleared $2 million, a 20-fold return, proving audiences could stomach gritty war reality. Fuller's helmet-level compositions, camera literally at eye height of crawling GIs, influenced Oliver Stone's Platoon and Sam Mendes's 1917. His rapid-fire dialogue turns foxholes into confessionals. Ever seen a dead man before, kid? They're the best teachers. Critics called it subversive. Veterans called it honest. At 70-plus minutes, it's lean, mean, and still smoking like a hot barrel, reminding viewers that war doesn't wait for historians. It writes its own first draft, sometimes on a shoestring and a dare. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. Don Siegel's paranoid thriller about seed pod doubles plays like a newsreel crossed with nightmare fuel. Allied artists capped the budget at $400,000, so Siegel shot on Culver City backlots, redressing storefronts to resemble sleepy Santa Mira. Principal photography wrapped in 19 whirlwind days. Profit margins soared past $3 million worldwide, making it one of the decade's most lucrative B-pictures. Originally saddled with a forced happy ending, Siegel covertly filmed the famous highway scream. Kevin McCarthy shrieking, "You're next," into oncoming traffic, after hours, cementing the bleak tone. Academics debate whether the film warns of communist infiltration or McCarthyism conformity, but modern viewers spot anxieties about social media, echo chambers, and identity theft. The crisp documentary style, voiceover framing device, actual traffic on LA freeways, grants the supernatural premise terrifying plausibility. NASA archivists later admitted the pod imagery influenced public expectations of alien life. Remakes keep the title, but none replicate the first film's raw urgency, where daylight is more frightening than night. Watching townsfolk march in locked smiles evokes the eerie sense that humanity's greatest fear is losing the right to feel unique. The last shot, cars obviously speeding past the panicked doctor, could unfold on any highway today. The Goddess, 1958. Paddy Chayefsky's screenplay, a thinly veiled riff on Marilyn Monroe's turbulent rise, tears into Hollywood's star-making machinery with surgical rage. Director John Cromwell shot on stark black and white stock, refusing glamour lighting for Kim Stanley's raw, method-driven portrayal of Rita Shane. Columbia financed at a modest $1 million, but recoiled when the film depicted sexual abuse, alcoholism, and public relations manipulation rarely admitted in 1950s cinema. Advertisers balked, box office sputtered. Yet Stanley's performance, filmed while she was 6 months pregnant, delivers heartbreak in microscopic gestures. Trembling hands, a gulp before forced laughter, an explosive breakdown in a dressing room mirror that cracks both glass and viewer. Feminist scholars revived the goddess in the 70s, recognizing an indictment of patriarchal myth-making that presage Valley of the Dolls, A Star is Born remakes, and even Black Swan. Today, amid conversations on celebrity exploitation, the film feels ripped from tabloid headlines. Its closing shot, Rita stumbling into a blinding spotlight, arms stretched like crucifixion, still stings as a warning. Fame may elevate, but it can also consume, leaving behind a shell glittering with other people's desires. Touch of Evil, 1958. When Universal handed Orson Welles a pulpy border town script, he alchemized it into a Baroque fever dream. The legendary 3-minute opening crane shot floats above neon signs, sneaks through alleys, and lands on a car bomb seconds before detonation. No dialogue, just the heartbeat of bongos and mariachi horns. Executives grumbled at the $12,000 single take, but later realized it saved a week of coverage. Still, they mutilated the edit, adding expository voiceovers and reshaping the ending without Welles. Only in 1998 did editor Walter Murch restore the director's intent, using Welles's 58-page memo as a map. The restored cut reveals soundscapes of overlapping Spanish, English, jukebox static, an audio collage predating Robert Altman's experiments. Welles's grotesque police captain, sweating corruption under a fat suit, clashes with Charlton Heston's idealistic Mexican agent, challenging American notions of border morality decades before policy debates dominated news cycles. Shadows warp around motels, oil derricks, and carnival lights, birthing the visual language of neo-noir. Modern directors borrow shamelessly. De Palma, Lynch, even Spielberg cite Touch of Evil as proof that space and time can be sculpted into pure anxiety. What began as a B-thriller became a Rosetta Stone for any filmmaker daring to bend reality within a single, hypnotic shot. Detour, 1955 British remake. Unable to secure UK distribution rights to the 1945 American cult noir, Anglo Amalgamated fashioned a new adaptation of Martin Goldsmith's public domain novel. Relocated from sun-blasted highways to rain-soaked Midlands canals, the film stars Richard Basehart as a drifting musician whose hitchhiking misfortune spirals into accidental murder. Shot in just 9 days on leftover Ealing sets and exterior fog so thick it seems otherworldly, the remake trades American fatalism for post-war displacement. No prince left Britain, and legal limbo buried it until a nitrate copy surfaced at the British Film Institute in 2004. Viewers were stunned by its fractured chronology. Flashbacks loop and contradict each other, anticipating Christopher Nolan's puzzle structures by decades. A phone booth finale, with Basehart staring at his rain-slick reflection, eerily foreshadows Blade Runner's neon melancholy. Though still unavailable on Blu-ray, the film screens at midnight programs across London's Prince Charles Cinema, proving that cinematic phantoms can slip their chains and haunt new generations. The British Detour whispers a chilling idea. Fate may be universal, but the scenery of despair is endlessly adaptable. Rafifi, 1955. Blacklisted American director Jules Dassin, exiled in France, channeled professional frustration into a meticulously orchestrated caper that set the template for every heist film to come. Unable to shoot daylight exteriors due to curfew police, Dassin filmed Parisian rooftops at 4 a.m., drilling his cast for weeks so they could perform a 30-minute burglary without dialogue or music. The silence magnifies each creak of a hinge and fall of plaster. Audiences reportedly held their breath. Costing roughly 200,000 francs, the film exploded at Cannes, earning Dassin Best Director and 4.4 million tickets in France alone, even as Mexico temporarily banned it after jewel thefts mimicked its techniques. Beyond suspense mechanics, Rafifi paints honor among thieves as a code stricter than society's laws. When rival gangsters kidnap the protagonist's godson, vengeance overrides loot. Every crime saga, from Ocean's 11 to Mission Impossible, borrows Dassin's blueprint of teamwork, precision, and the inevitable snag that unravels everything. The final chase through rainy Paris, headlights slicing fog, remains a masterclass in kinetic despair. Dassin turned exile into artistry, proving that stripped citizenship can't silence a filmmaker with patience, tape measures, and a ticking watch. 3:10 to Yuma, 1957. Delmer Daves reimagined the Western not as a landscape of endless vistas, but as a psychological chamber piece ticking toward a deadly train departure. Shot in high-contrast black and white to save budget and strip away Technicolor heroics, the film stars Glenn Ford, flipping his screen persona to play charming outlaw Ben Wade opposite Van Heflin's cash-strapped rancher, Dan Evans. Production rented Southern Pacific locomotives rather than build replicas, aligning the shooter's frantic timetable with the script's suspenseful countdown. Exteriors in 2 weeks under desert sun, interiors in 18 days on Columbia's Stage 11. George Dunning's sparse guitar theme rides beneath dialogue like a watchful coyote, foreshadowing Ennio Morricone's later Western scores. Critics initially balked at Ford as villain, but audiences embraced the moral ambiguity, unthinkable in early 50s odor fare. Quentin Tarantino praises its pure tension drip, and James Mangold's 2007 remake kept most beats intact, proving the original's skeletal structure was already perfect. The movie won't dazzle with sweeping Monument Valley shots. Instead, it tightens a noose around two men in a hotel room, questioning whether a good deed is worth dying for when drought, debt, and pride already strangle a man. The clock's relentless tick still echoes like hoofbeats. The Face of Another, 1959 prototype. Years before the acclaimed 1966 feature, Hiroshi Teshigahara and novelist Kobo Abe experimented with identity in a 17-minute, 16mm short funded by the Japan Experimental Film Group. A corporate chemist, disfigured in an accident, tests a latex face molded by medical students under fluorescent lab glare. The mask fits but alienates, provoking existential dread. The filmmakers paired harsh electronic drones with clinical visuals, operating room whites, mirrored corridors, to induce sensory unease. Critics at Tokyo's Sogetsu Art Center complained the score felt like surgery on the ear, yet psychology departments soon booked the short to illustrate depersonalization disorder. When Teshigahara expanded the concept into the 1966 feature, audiences versed in the short recognized recurring motifs: blank apartment blocks, crowds ignoring a man's silent panic, and a finale suggesting that swapping appearances can't outrun inner emptiness. The short's scarcity, archived on fragile acetate, adds mythic allure, yet its influence lingers in body horror cinema. Cronenberg cited Abe's prose when crafting Dead Ringers, and modern VR designers discuss the second skin syndrome in similar terms. This overlooked reel reminds us that some ideas need only a quarter hour to burrow under humanity's collective skin. Odds Against Tomorrow, 1959. Harry Belafonte fought both Hollywood and Jim Crow to mount this tense heist film about racism's slow fuse. Financing part of the $1.4 million budget himself, he hired blacklisted writer Abraham Polanski under a pseudonym and persuaded director Robert Wise to shoot on wintry Harlem streets and the upstate town of Hudson, New York. The plot assembles a black gambler, a racist ex-con, and a desperate ex-cop for a bank robbery doomed by bigotry. Wise employed handheld Aeroflex cameras, capturing wind-whipped jackets and dirty snow, giving the film a cinema verite edge. Jazz legend John Lewis improvised cues on set, pioneering a live scoring method Miles Davis would mirror a year later. Southern theater chains boycotted. Northern critics praised its nerve. Despite limited release, the movie cracked Variety's top 40 rentals and later influenced Sidney Lumet's Dog Day Afternoon. Spike Lee cites The Final Inferno, flames consuming both criminals, as formative visual rhetoric. Watching Belafonte's face hardened by systemic disdain, then melted by literal fire, viewers grasp America's tragic arithmetic. Hatred multiplies loss. The title isn't just about odds on a getaway. It measures the chance of building any tomorrow while prejudice still weighs the dice. Shadows, 1959. John Cassavetes, short on cash but bursting with hunger, urged late-night radio listeners to mail him $1 each, enough to fund a guerrilla shoot across Manhattan. Armed with a Bolex 16mm and a one-page outline, he followed three mixed-race siblings drifting through coffeehouses, jazz lofts, and Times Square marquees. Contrary to legend, dialogue sprang from months of rehearsals, actors sculpting beats until cameras rolled as if eavesdropping. The first cut premiered in 1958, but Cassavetes scrapped half, reshot, and debuted the final cut in November 1959 at the Paris Film Festival, where it won the Critics' Prize. Its grainy images capture subway rumble and street horns in raw frequencies. Modern digital cameras sterilize. Scenes unfold like overheard confessions. A white boyfriend recoils upon learning his lover is black. A failed pickup melts into sidewalk melancholy. Critics hailed it as the birth of American independent cinema. Future filmmakers from Scorsese to Greta Gerwig cite it for authenticity. Cassavetes proved you don't need studio permission to tell stories vibrating with urban pulse, just curiosity, empathy, and a willingness to risk imperfection for truth. The final shot pans neon signs flickering "The End," but the real message blazes between frames. Real life never wraps on cue. 17 reels, 17 risks, each a spark that set future filmmakers ablaze. These forgotten 50s masterpieces weren't content to entertain. They challenged medicine, media, war, race, and even identity itself. Next time someone calls the Eisenhower era square, invite them to this secret marathon and watch their assumptions melt like nitrate stock in a hot projector. If you're hungry for more buried treasure, hit subscribe and keep your curiosity humming, because the past still has plenty of futures left to reveal.